Imagine a chilly autumnal morning in 1961. A long, dark saloon on the recently opened M1 travels through the early dawn with a quiet that seems almost out of place for a British vehicle of its era. Not a rattling. Don't tremble. No effort at all. Just a calm, steady authority at speeds that would make many cars marketed for twice as much look foolish. Using 2 fingers, the driver modifies the walnut-trimmed steering wheel. He is comfortably supported by the leather seat. Against the grey morning, the lit insignia on the bonnet glows a gentle, proud crimson. The Wolseley 6110 is that vehicle. And that's exactly the idea if you've never heard of it. This is not a tale about a failed automobile. This is the tale of a car that prospered in silence, provided devoted service, and was eventually destroyed, not by its own fault, but by the forces that surrounded it. Forces that had nothing to do with engineering and everything to do with politics, finance, and the internal turmoil of a British auto industry that was gradually collapsing. You must first comprehend what Britain was in 1959 in order to comprehend the Wolseley 6110. 14 years had passed since the end of the war. In 1954, rationing was finally abolished. The nation was slowly and carefully starting to spend once more. When Britain's first complete motorway, the M1, opened in November 1959, the nation's perception of driving was drastically altered. All of a sudden, it was feasible to cruise at a high pace continuously. The subject of how a car would perform at 80 miles per hour was no longer speculative. It was instantaneous and genuine. The market for a refined, quick, truly comfortable British saloon had never been more relevant. With the Mk2, Jaguar recognized this. For consumers who desire that degree of ambition without having to pay Jaguar pricing, BMC thought the Wolseley 6110 might provide the similar response. They weren't mistaken. However, they didn't put up a strong enough fight for it. Built on BMC's C-Series chassis, the 6110 debuted in 1959 alongside the Riley 472 and Austin A99. However, the Wolseley was something more carefully thought out than those cars, which were sufficiently finished. The entire dashboard was finished with real walnut veneer. For longer trips, the deep leather seats were adequately supported. Road testers of the time were really impressed by the cabin's thick carpeting, which absorbed road noise. A laminated windscreen, a safety feature that was still only available as an option in many more costly British automobiles, was installed as standard. The back windows completely wound down. The factory took great care to ensure that every door and panel fit perfectly. This was not an unintentional luxury. It was a purposeful declaration of the intended meaning of the Wolseley moniker. A 2.912-litre, 6-cylinder C-Series engine was located beneath the hood. It generated 120 braking horsepower in its normal configuration. Modern road testing verified a time of between 12.8 and 13.2 seconds from 0 to 60 miles per hour, which Autocar and Motor separately reported in tests published during that time. The actual maximum speed was recorded at somewhat more than 100 miles per hour. In addition to the basic manual gearbox, an optional Borg-Warner automatic transmission was offered, and overdrive could be chosen to lessen engine strain on lengthy highway trips. For a huge 6-cylinder saloon of this era, fuel consumption at a constant 70 miles per hour was measured at about 24 miles per gallon. According to Autocar's 1961 road test, the 6110 offered refinement that was comparable to vehicles in a much higher price range. The motor commended for steadiness at high speeds. Excessive excitement was not applied to any publication. They were sincere when they complimented an automobile. When the Mark II was introduced in 1961, it had a front anti-roll bar added to the suspension, better Lockheed brakes with a servo installed as standard, and additional body sealing improvements that lessened wind noise at highway speeds. In 1964, the Mark III was released with a new front grille, updated interior details, and ongoing technical advancements. Every generation was a true advancement. The engineers that worked on it were aware of its requirements and met them. However, this is where the narrative starts to change. Early in the 1960s, Austin, Morris, Wolseley, Riley, Milligram, and Vanden Plas all shared mechanical components in different combinations, and BMC was manufacturing cars under an astounding number of different badges. The reasoning for this was that different buyers reacted differently to different names and trim levels. The issue was that as a result, not a single vehicle in the lineup ever received the concentrated investment and ongoing development required of a real flagship. Internal competition between the Wolseley 6110 and its own badge-engineered siblings was constant. Budgets for marketing were dispersed widely. Funds for development were restricted. The automobile was never fully allowed to reach its full potential. In contrast, Jaguar focused entirely on the Mk2. Just one vehicle, one distinct identity, one consistent message to the market. The outcomes demonstrated the difference in corporate commitment. Then there was the issue of image, which no engineering advancement could resolve. Even those who lived through it were taken aback by how quickly Britain was changing in the middle of the 1960s. The post-war establishment's cultural burden was quickly diminishing. Wolseley was one of the names that had been associated with authority for decades, but a younger and more powerful purchasing public started to perceive them as belonging to a bygone period. By 1966, a different type of buyer was starting to interpret the illuminated bonnet badge that a bank manager in 1961 thought was a mark of true distinction. Not in terms of prestige. As custom. Maybe a little outdated. The car itself suffered greatly as a result of this. However, markets are not legal tribunals. Britain's police forces were far more pragmatic and far less romantic. Because the Wolseley 6110 was an exceptional patrol vehicle by objective standards, they purchased it in significant quantities throughout its manufacture life. It was ideal for motorway patrol operations on Britain's growing road network because of its mix of true high-speed capability, interior room adequate for personnel and equipment, long-distance dependability, and composed high-speed handling. Officers who used it for operational tasks gave it positive reviews that emphasized functionality over sentiment. It was a vehicle that could be relied upon at high speed, and in such situation, faith was the only valuable asset. This institutional trust is not an insignificant detail. It is an important confirmation. The Wolseley 6110 was regarded as dependable and competent enough to be used on the quickest routes in Britain to safeguard the populace. Many of the era's more well-known automobiles were unable to meet that level. The 6110 was no longer produced after 1968. Rather than being spectacular, the reasons were structural. After BMC and Leyland merged to form British Leyland in 1968, the organization grew so complex and internally contradictory that rationalization was unavoidable. The inherent limit of the C-Series platform's development potential had been achieved. Instead of being increased, badge engineering was being decreased throughout the spectrum. No authorized replacement for the 6110 was in the works. Quietly, bureaucratically, and without fanfare, the decision to halt manufacturing was made. Up until its complete retirement in 1975, the Wolseley name persisted on smaller and increasingly less prestigious vehicles. Both the 1885s and the 6 were attempts to take the brand into the new front-wheel drive BMC engineering period, but they lacked the 6110's weight and personality. It is a kind of regret that the moniker outlived its best expression by 7 years. After leaving the workforce, the 6110s were not always handled with kindness. Like most British steel of the era, the C-Series body was prone to corrosion, especially around the rear wheel arches, in the sills, and in the floor sections. Before the 1980s vintage car movement provided the cultural and economic conditions that may have saved them, many automobiles began to decay. For mechanical parts, others were damaged. It is quite rare to find survivors in their original, honest, and well-preserved state today. Finding one means discovering something that has survived not only weather and time, but also the apathy of a time that was unaware of what it was losing. Those who drove them or traveled large distances with their families as kids often recall particular details. The distinct scent of leather on a hot afternoon. The door closed with a deliberate, weighted sound that conveyed stability without effort, rather than a crash. The way the engine found its rhythm on a wide road and just kept running for as long as you needed it to, without any drama or complaints. The bonnet badge's radiance in the gloom of a winter night. These are not the recollections of a typical automobile. These are the recollections of individuals who were, without realizing it at the time, having better experiences than they needed to have. The disappearance of the Wolseley 6110 was not due to its shortcomings. It disappeared because the organization that constructed it was never able to adequately safeguard its creation. It should have had a more distinct identity, a champion with greater focus, and a slower-moving market. None of those items were given to it. Every driver and passenger who had a positive experience with it received more in return than it was ever acknowledged for. That is something to keep in mind. And while there are still those who remember, it is important to state it clearly. It would mean a lot to have you on this channel if you find yourself returning to this kind of meticulous, truthful history. It only takes a moment to subscribe, and it guarantees that you will receive the next tale when it's available.